Hello and welcome to the Gambling Files podcast, the podcast that is without Fintan again, because he's way busy being a top executive, helping people solve their problems, and occasionally probably creating new ones for them. In his absence, it's just me, your host, Jon Bruford. Well, not just me, because we've got a guest as well. But before we get to our guest, I'd really like to talk about our beautiful sponsors, who are like an oasis in the desert, like flowers, unexpected flowers, not chocolates, just flowers, beautiful, beautiful flowers, and they smell good. Our sponsors smell good. But that does remind me of a joke. Oh man, this is such an English joke as well. But I'm going to tell it anyway, right? So there's these men, right? Oh man, I could do a joke for each sponsor, but no, that's a terrible idea. So there's these blokes. They're in the desert, and they're dying of thirst. They're walking through the desert, and they're like, water. And one of them spots in the distance loads of tents, and they're like, people that go, and they get over to these tents, and there's all these people under the tent, and like sort of, it's like a market stalls kind of thing, and there's all of these desserts. And there's all the fabulous looking, and they go to the first store and they say, water. And the bloke's like, sorry, I haven't got any water, but I've got some Angel Delight, and if you want to, and there's some jelly down the front. And they're like, oh. Go to the next stall, and the guy's like, oh, I haven't got any water. There's some blancmange down the front, and there's a meringue top dessert just there, and that one's got hundreds and thousands on. They're like, we'll try the next one, and they go through every stall, and nobody has any water. They've just got desserts, and they go out the other side, and the one guy turns to the others. He goes, "That was really strange." And one of the guys says, yes, it was a trifle bizarre. So our sponsors are in no particular order, the delightful Odds Matrix. If Odds Matrix were a flower, well, you've got the old Shakespeare quote, a rose by any other name still smells really damn good. And, Odds Matrix, every matrix, they're both roses and both names. Fintan is, of course, not here to give you the details about that. I really should get that product demo. But needless to say, when we accept sponsors on the podcast, they're not... It's not Premier League due diligence. It's not, has the check cleared? Fuck yes, let's go. It's, can we honestly, reasonably endorse this? Do we think this is good? If it's not, if it's shit, we're like, well, thanks, but we'll go penniless instead. It's not just a sponsorship; it's an endorsement from us. We believe in their product. So, Odds Matrix from every matrix, which leads us nicely on to our second sponsor. Well, it's not really another sponsor, another platinum sponsor, who we like to call OptiMove, because that's what they're called. The number one CRM software provider in the iGaming industry, catering to the majority of the EGR Power 50. Yeah, I know, right? Now, I have seen the demo for this. It is excellent. I'm not bullshitting you. If you don't believe me, get the demo. I guarantee you will not be writing to me to say, you're a tit. Well, you might, but it'll be, you're a tit, and you are right, which is fine. And our final sponsor is the majestic Clarion Gaming, the simple buttercup, you could say, of the flower world. But where would we be without buttercups? Exactly. We'd be in hell. So Clarion Gaming, organizers of course, the fabulous ICE Barcelona and the upcoming IGB Live, which is, of course, in London at the start of July, and expect really great things there. So that's our sponsors, and they've to be honest, made all of this possible because, you know, otherwise I'd just be talking to myself, and where's the fun in that? Although I might be talking, well, I would be talking to myself if we didn't have such a fabulous guest. Now, today's guest, she is a returning guest. She's been on before several times. And she's a sort of resident expert on Germany. We're joined by lawyer Michelle Hembury, who is senior associate at Melchers, which is a law firm which has many offices and many lawyers. Michelle, welcome to the podcast. Thank you for joining us.
Well, thank you for having me again. It's a pleasure.
It's okay. So the reason that I got in touch and I asked you to come on the podcast was, and we're going to sort of go in a bit of a circle. The operator story that came out of Germany last week, as we're recording this, I think. But
kind of 2 weeks ago.
But the blog post that kicked it off was the week before, wasn't it? So that sort of got things ticking over in my head, and so many of the decisions by the German regulator just seem absolutely hilariously bizarre. Not a trifle bizarre, but yeah.
Actually, is trifle bizarre like a sweet or a snack
no?
or something?
So it's bizarre as in Bazaar. So like a Middle Eastern, you know.
Okay. Like
so
a
it's the
marketplace
phonetic.
something.
Yes. So it's the phonetic trifle bizarre. But there is an expression in English. A trifle bizarre means that was a little bit odd.
Okay. Well, I've learned something already.
I did preface the joke by saying it's a very English joke. But I mean, that is a very English expression. That is a trifle bizarre. I mean, trifle. But so if something is trifling, it's something small.
Okay.
And if something is trifle, it's something delicious, probably. Do you know, I don't think I've ever had trifle.
Neither have I. I don't think so.
Yeah, but it's probably stranger for me to have never had trifle. Because A, I'm old, and B, I'm English.
Well, as we've established before, I'm partially English as well. So I could have had multiple chances in my past to have a try.
True, you should have a word with the relatives about that. Have you ever had jellied eels?
No.
Me neither.
But I did love wine gums growing up.
Yeah, they're pretty good.
And those are not that familiar here in Germany.
That's interesting because Germany, I mean, and I love hearing German people say this, and I know you're not going to pronounce it the same way, which is it's going to be a crushing disappointment for me. But what we call in this country gummy, I've some German people I know, they pronounce it with a longer U. They're gummi, and I love the way people say that. I think it's beautiful. But it's not dissimilar. It's it's a gelatin sweet, isn't it? Really.
Yeah, more or less. Yeah.
But yeah, wine gums are really good. I've used them on I've used them as fuel on marathons, would you believe?
Most people, I know a lot of people who do that, even in the gym, use it as a kind of mid-workout kind of fuel or snack.
Yeah, and if you're running long enough, you can just, if you get the long thin ones, you can just tuck them down the side of your cheek and just leave it there.
Like a hamster.
Basically, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. There's there are many reasons why I'm single, Michelle, and the way that I eat wine gums is just one of them.
I'm sure that was a criteria, yeah.
Well, I probably shouldn't have included it on my Tinder profile in the first place, to be fair.
But it makes you more approachable, more natural and authentic, I think. I've read that people kind of appreciate those details. Not too perfect and glamorized than your profile.
Because otherwise people would look at my pictures and they'd just be, no, he's too perfect.
Yeah.
Even my own mother would never look at me and say, he's just too perfect. Just does not happen. Or I should say has never happened. Obviously, it's not going to happen now. As regular listeners will know, my parents are dead. I didn't I didn't kill them, just in case anybody's listening. So Michelle, I want to kick off. I've lost my notes. I've got some notes on the screen here, and they're excellent notes, I should say. What is right? So legislation changed to allow online gambling in 2021, right?
Exactly, yeah. That was a mid-2021, and for the first time, private operators were allowed to apply for licenses for online casinos specifically. Sports betting had already been permissible for about 1 to 1.5 years. Obviously, we had a huge crisis in regarding the sports betting licensing back in 2012, 2014. But yeah, looking at 2020 onwards, more or less the online sphere has become permissible, not so much regulated, I'd say, but permissible.
Yeah. Okay. What's been the evolution since the change then? Because it seems like every time we see a story out of Germany at the moment, it's about the growth of the black market. It's about everything's going horribly wrong. And what's been the sort of the arc for the industry? What stands out?
Yeah, I mean, that's really interesting actually, because I remember, I think 1 or 2 years ago, our then newly established regulator announced very prominently at a conference here in Germany that they were aiming at a channelization rate of 100%. And obviously then the whole regulated market became very excited about that, but I don't think that this has actually been achieved.
Can I just? I know. I appreciate this is going to sound like a stupid question, but there's something dawned on me. I was thinking about this very question last night. Could you define channelization for me? Because it's a word that is used an awful lot in the industry, and I'm not 100% sure that the industry, not you, this is not a diss of you at all. I'm not 100% sure that the industry. Well, let's just say I don't know what it means. What does it mean?
Well, from what I understand, it means that people who are interested in participating in games of chance opt for the white labeled offers rather than the black market offers, because the white labeled offers are more attractive in addition to the protection they provide.
Do you think it's? I mean,
but obviously it remains problematic as to how to behave or how to evaluate the behavior of those customers that have already chosen black market offers, maybe from times where the market was completely unregulated, or still opt for the black market. So, yeah.
But the thing is, like, has 100% channelization ever happened?
No, obviously not. And if we come back to the question on the rate itself, the regulator now says they've actually almost achieved that by, I think they refer to 95 or 94% approximately, whereas then that publication led to huge outrage amongst other stakeholders, the industry and experts of any kind. And other numbers more or less highlight that there's not more than 50% of all customers being channeled to white labeled or white listed operators.
Yeah, I mean, even the really rudimentary research on web traffic, on web searches, would suggest like 70% would be a miracle.
Yeah, but that's exactly the point. The question is how you evaluate numbers and kind of the market shares. The regulator just goes by looking at tax revenue. So they compare how high taxes were when the market was unregulated to how high taxes being paid are now. And from that, they say, well, obviously it's gone down, and that means that all of the operators who were were operating on the black market and offshore, they don't operate anymore because they're so, I don't know, I can't even give a reasoning behind it. I don't want to kind of bash the regulator here, but obviously the industry then drew up quite a different set of statistics and numbers, as you've said, looking at websites, searches, and even kind of results from search engines and so on. And that led to the assumption, which seems a bit more like understandable, to like a 50% rate. 52 are other numbers. I think that's what's currently being discussed. And obviously, if the regulator themselves view channelization to already have been achieved, then they, I would assume, don't see enough need anymore in enforcing against offshore or black market operators, if in their opinion they don't exist anymore in Germany.
I've got to say, I love the regulators' stance on this, and I'm going to learn from that and implement it in my own life. And when there's things I don't like, what I'm basically going to do is I'm going to bury my head in the sand and I'm going to say la 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 really loudly, because if oh my god.
The only problem is if you do that, nobody could hear you because your head would be stuck in the sand.
Oh yeah, it's true. Well, I'll do that and then I'll stick my head in the sand.
Okay.
Or up my own ass.
Yeah.
But obviously I'll take my headphones off first because... wow, though. That's... I mean, just saying, yeah, we'll get 100% channelization. That as a starting point is just... That's hilarious. But also this... I mean, oh my God.
The thing is,
it just sounds like absolute guesswork. And
the
obviously
thing is
some of it is.
The regulatory framework has implemented quite a set of mechanisms or measures that the regulator could be making use of to enforce against the black market. Because what they say at the moment is that the whitelisted market needs to be regulated and more or less restricted to basically zero economic growth, because that would be sufficient in the light that there is, quote unquote, no black market anymore, only 5% left, right? But on top of that, and that is something that experts and the industry are calling for actually, is that the regulator makes more use of their enforcement measures and the legal basis that the regulatory framework provides. I mean, I'm very sure that the regulator and the enforcement department is doing that already, and they always kind of promote their work that they've been doing. And I assume, and from what I've seen, they are actually kind of sending out a lot of hearing letters and interdiction orders and everything. But from my experience and from what I've heard at different conferences, and I don't know, most of those recipients of these letters simply don't react, and therefore then these enforcement measures are not really enforcing. They're just kind of highlighting an attempt by the regulator, but not really doing much. So what they could do would be either to block payment services, or on top of that, block the IPs, or like the IP providers, like business. The latter has sadly come to a very sudden halt, because an administrative court in Germany found that the legal basis providing this measure is not righteous. Basically, it lacks a proper legal basis, and therefore the regulator has, ever since 2021, not been able to make use of that enforcement opportunity. So what is left is payment service blocking, right? And that could be very successful and also necessary, but with crypto, what's the word, values or crypto money, obviously that also has come to, it has its borders, and the regulator has not yet found a way to maneuver around that hurdle.
Well, I don't know if I assume you've seen some of what the UK regulator's been talking about with, because they've very publicly said, payment providers, but also platform supplier, the software suppliers, the game suppliers. They're basically saying, they're saying to the licensed market, do you seriously want to be taking products from somebody that's supplying the black market, which is undercutting you? And it, you know, what I mean, it is a pretty fair question. And I wonder maybe the German regulator is going to go down that road, because it, you know, there are it's not, obviously payment processing is super important, but so is having games and having a platform to operate on, and the integration of all of that,
Yeah.
etc., and hosting and blah blah blah. You know, there's tons and tons of sort of
I mean,
relatively weak spots.
I've advised so many operators during their licensing proceedings, and although they are obliged to kind of submit proof of their technical providers and explain how to contact them and who their developers are for the slot or poker games, for example, or the casino games, the regulator is not really in a position to question their reliability, right? So the network that those other suppliers are adhering to, or adhering to, that is not topic of the licensing regime in Germany at the moment, just because pursuant to administrative law, it's only between the operator itself and the regulator. This is maybe going to change in the next couple of years, just because the regulator has understood, I think, and from what they've been publishing, I take that that they need to expand the realms of the parties that are involved and included in German regulation. They just have to accept that there are so many more suppliers in that chain that actually form and provide the end product, how the consumer, how the players are viewing and seeing it and being approached with affiliates, for example, and so on. But at the moment, this is not part of the licensing or more so enforcement regime. Again, they can enforce against payment service providers. They can issue measures against affiliates, but not more than that, actually.
Yeah, it is kind of weird. We're only talking about legislation it's not even 4 years old, and it already
Exactly.
appears to be out of date.
Yeah, it never really had a chance in that sense to succeed fully if we want to measure success of a regulation based on channelization rate, obviously.
Mm-hmm.
And then if we were going to do that, we need to find a proper basis on how to calculate that. But since I think 2022, the whole industry and the regulator and all parties of our German federal states have been in such a whirlwind of discussions and even controversy in regard to the channelization rate that I myself personally feel like everyone's forgetting to actually try to channel, and everyone's just discussing channelization rates. So this is kind of contradicting the whole purpose of it. And then just a few weeks ago, I attended a conference where one kind of player protection expert, you could say, said that channelization is not even a proper aim for a regulation such as gambling regulation or any kind of regulation that looks at protecting consumers, and that then had kind of a backlash in itself. And I don't think it's helpful at the moment to question the four main aims of our regulation if we're not even agreeing on if they're succeeding or not.
It's fair. It's very fair, in fact. Yeah. I think not just for Germany, but I think globally we're seeing a really difficult period for regulators when they're being challenged by some really shoddy practices, especially in land-based. But it's also highlighting how little a lot of them have been doing. Especially, I mean, Australia is the gift that keeps on giving in that respect. I mean, that's just breathtaking. But Vegas, which is always held up as this this godly, the regulations that everybody aspires to and all of that, and we're talking about colossal money laundering failings. I mean, on a massive scale for God knows how long, and I would honestly, the man in the middle of it, it's the lightest of taps on the wrist. And this, it's not a good look for a regulator, because what's the word I'm looking for? Where's the example? Where's the deterrent? If somebody's
Mm.
going to do that and they're going to be like, oh no, I lost my gambling license, I'll just have to go and count my money.
Mm.
Oh
Yeah.
no, how terrible. You poor thing. You're free to go and live your life with all of your money. And it just, like I say, it's not a good look for a regulator. It's like we're always told within the industry that gambling is like the third most regulated industry on the planet. But that only means something if the regulator is active, involved, um, and a part of things. And it's like in the UK. So we had the new dude at the Gambling Commission. Well, he's not new anymore. Um, and there's been a change. There's much more dialogue with the industry now.
Mm.
There's much more interaction and more openness, and it's much more of a two-way thing. And I'm not saying problems are solved and everything is perfect, but it's way better than it was.
I mean, it's getting better in Germany as well. I have to kind of give props to our regulator. Obviously, they are working with limited resources.
Yeah.
I think the employment rate at the regulators' offices is still, even 4 years into our new regulation, has still not been fully equipped. And obviously, they always have to kind of see how to juggle their resources that they have. And there's so many operators that have multiple demands daily that they have to adhere and look into. Obviously, new questions, and there are, I think, dozens of court proceedings and litigation is still pending that they have to look into as well, obviously. So it is a very hard job. And then on top of that, traveling to different conferences and interacting with other regulators, looking at best practice examples or even not so good examples from abroad, and then discussing with the industry and looking and listening to their needs and ideas. I think that is a full-time job, and we just have to admit that working for the state or working for an authority is not, in the sense as we understand it, designed to be a 24/7 job of, I mean, it is formally speaking a full-time job, but they have very limited and restricted kind of time that they have available. And so they are getting better. I'm meeting them, and we are meeting them quite often at these conferences, at least those that are occurring in Germany itself. So that's very good. And they are listening and sharing sharing their experiences, even sharing their struggles, which is also, I think, something that leads to more authenticity and honesty on both sides. But obviously, it still is correct what you're saying, that when it comes down to it, enforcement would probably have to be increased in a manner that is efficient. It's not that they are not sending out these interdiction orders, but they're just being ignored, and therefore they are missing their point. Whereas, yeah, I think IP blocking and payment service blocking would be the way to go, if, again, that in itself remains efficient. Keyword, like crypto.
Yeah. And I mean, it's interesting that I think Curacao is the only the only jurisdiction that has even really looked at regulating crypto. And it's
Oh,
like,
yeah.
if there's something that's worrying, dangerous, etc., blah blah blah. For me, my approach to that is like, well, let's get it in here. Let's look at it, understand it, and let's regulate it.
Yeah.
If somebody wants to gamble in crypto, they can do, but you can do it in a licensed place, which is going to potentially benefit your schools and your hospitals, etc. But from what you were just saying, I think it's very cool that the regulator is not hiding, because that is an option for people in government. They can just stick their fingers in their ears and go la 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 la, everything's brilliant, and they're not hiding. They're engaging in dialogue. They're turning up to these conferences, etc. And actually, that is, like you say, I mean, it's the authenticity. It's remembering that these are people fundamentally, and I'm as guilty as forgetting that as anybody else is. But yeah, showing up and saying, holding your hands up and saying, all right, we're not perfect, but we're here.
Yeah, but I mean, on top of that, obviously the regulator has. I'm happy to admit that a lot of the troubles that the industry is facing is inherited or was inherited by the regulator from the federal states that drew up our regulatory framework, the Interstate Treaty on Gambling, because obviously in Germany, gambling is being regulated individually by each and every single federal state in Germany. So they all came together a few years back and said, okay, let's kind of stick our heads together and draw up this interstate treaty, making it basically more or less a federal law for all of those states. And the regulator was then established based on that in 2021 and 22. So a lot of that comes from other stakeholders or other humans essentially, and the regulator is just looking to adapt and interpret as best as possible. But, and again, coming back to this conference where the regulator announced 100% channelization rate, looking forward, the whole regulated industry obviously obliged to follow all of those restrictions that come from the interstate treaty were hopeful, because they then said, well, at least the regulator is looking to enforce properly against the black market. So we will actually have a chance in attracting players back towards us, even in spite of those heavy restrictions that we have to adhere to. But now I think the frustration that ties kind of back to your very first question, it's just a widespread frustration on part of on the side of the industry now, because the regulator is interpreting all of those or most of those restrictions even more restrictively, making it even more unattractive to operate on the whitelisted market or as part of the licensed market. And then on top of that, they are, I wouldn't say failing, but they are having huge trouble in properly effectively enforcing against the black market. And that's where the frustration comes from. And this keyword of authenticity starts lacking at some point, even if the regulator is showing up at these conferences and kind of promising this and promising that and showing understanding or being understanding and stuff. Because at the end of the day, casino operators, meaning those operators that offer slot games on the internet, they still have to offer spins that have to have a duration of at a minimum 5 seconds, and that's just not compatible to like what the consumers really want or players.
What do the players really want?
3 seconds or less per spin. Well, I've been told.
But this does come into my next question here, because so let's say that 52% channelization is correct, or thereabouts, right? That means almost half of players are choosing to go elsewhere, consciously choosing to go elsewhere, offshore, right? Yeah. And with everything that involves, right? That's a lot. I mean, that's an awful lot. So what's so good about the black market offering, or what's so bad about the regulated offering? Is the difference that massive?
Yeah, it is. There are so many product restrictions in Germany that these operators have to adhere to. So, for example, a sports betting operator will only be able at best to increase their betting catalog or betting portfolio by 200 new bets or sports events to be kind of in the focus of betting, whereas before they could just expand it by their own discretion. Slot games have to have, as I've said, a minimum spin duration of 5 seconds. A maximum stake per spin is €1 and not more. Players have to go through a very onerous KYC procedure, which in itself, it's necessary, it's sensible, it's I wouldn't criticize it in itself, but then if you want to increase your, for example, deposit limits, you have to go through, again, a very onerous process to prove your or the affordability or your financial liquidity as a player, and then you have the discussion in Germany on how you do that properly and following German administrative laws and so on. So all of this ties in to making a product more unattractive. On top of that, advertisement has been heavily restricted. It's not completely forbidden, but still heavily restricted. And I feel like, me obviously being a lawyer for operators at most, the operators just, kind of resigned to a certain degree, saying, what now? Every week I receive letters on behalf of those operators where the regulator says, but this loyalty program is not okay, you have to take it down. This banner is not okay, you have to take it down. This influencer is not allowed to kind of advertise for your product, you'll have to cancel this and so on. You have to cancel the sponsorship for this and that. And everything that the operators are trying to somewhat make their product or their websites more attractive is in 90% of the cases, I'd say, being restricted by the regulator. And that leads to this widespread frustration I just mentioned.
Oh, I can totally understand it. Because, I mean, obviously regulation it's very important for a whole bunch of reasons, but if it's too restrictive, it actually it can throttle creativity, for one thing. Although the industry is a very creative one, we'll always find a way around something, but if it's too restrictive, then players bugger off to somewhere where it's not so restrictive and where the games are more fun.
And the games are more fun, and then I think most players are scared off by the registration flow in Germany because it's quite, as I've said, onerous. It doesn't only have to adhere to player protection regulation, but also anti-money laundering regulation, which again, it is necessary, it's sensible. But if you then go through the whole registration flow and find a product that is not even attractive, you will probably not do it again at a different whitelisted operator, even if you know that there is a large number of, I think, about 40 or 50 operators that are listed on this whitelist that is being published by the regulator. You'll just say, well, I want to continue. I want this to be easy and kind of approachable, and I'll find it at the black market, probably.
Is there not the potential, and maybe this is already the case, I honestly don't know, but is there not the potential to have a single sign-in, a single login, where and so just one onerous process, which will then open up all of the legal regulated casinos to a player? So one KYC, AML, etc., instead of having to do it for each operator.
Yeah, you have to do it for each operator. Just last week, I drew up a kind of a legal opinion or memo, call it how you want, and try to assess if it is even possible to include two licensed, meaning white label, offers on one top level domain, right? Mm-hmm. And even that is such an onerous process for both involved operators, because kind of breaking it down, essentially, it comes down to the payment flow. The operator always has to ensure that the transaction is being transparently moved from A to B, meaning between the single operator and the player, the customer. You can't create a shared wallet, for example, saying that the customer registers once with operator A and then just moves to the sportsbook offer of operator B by moving digitally, more or less, his or her money, fiat money. Not even talking about crypto here in Germany. It's completely non-permissible and prohibited. So even that is such a huge process and is tied to so many restrictions and regulations and obligations pursuant to anti-money laundering, data protection law, player protection, gambling regulation, all of that jazz. So that in the end, I think most operators just say, okay, no, that is trouble in itself. And if you have this problem with only two operators, two stakeholders who have that idea, how do you go by a set of 40 operators? So as a whole, every customer has to open their own player account with each operator that is licensed, and then do that again and again and again.
But I get what you're saying. What I'm talking about is if you encapsulated that, the KYC AML stuff, not the wallet, just the checking on that customer in those first checks. And then it's like being let into a theme park. You know, you queue up at the gate and you get your wristband, and once you've got your wristband, you're in and you can go on any road you want. That's what I was thinking of, really.
Yeah, I mean, that would be an idea, but then you'd have to have one operator in the middle. It's like a monopoly, or one provider that takes on the whole registration flow, secures,
the government would do that.
Oh, okay. I mean, sure, why not? Maybe you want to send this idea over to our German regulator. Is there any jurisdiction that does that?
No,
do you know of?
I don't believe there is, no. But if I proposed that, you know exactly what they'd say to me. They'd be like, but why are we listening to you? You don't even have hair.
But you are brilliant, so that would not.
We should have recorded this earlier when you weren't drunk. Is there an industry body in Germany representing the operators?
Actually, there are 3 that I know of that are representing the online, or the operators that are also operating on the internet, on the online sphere. So that would be the German Online Casino Association, the German Sports Betting Association, and then there's one that is, I think, called the German Association of Operators on the Telemedia. I can't really translate catchy. Properly. Yeah, I mean, it is more catchy in German. German listeners will know.
Not many things are more catchy in German. I mean, maybe there's room there. Maybe this is a little thing I could do. This could be like my side hustle. I could set up an industry body for the unregulated German web operators.
Well, I mean, that would be an interesting approach, bundling their interests.
I've spotted a window there, I think.
Yeah. I mean, they have 50% of the market share, but don't tell anyone.
But are the industry bodies, are they effective particularly? I mean, do they engage in meaningful dialogue? Or because I've long had a bit of a problem with the American Gaming Association because it's just crap.
Yeah, I mean, they definitely have.
It hasn't always been crap, just for the record. It's just crap now.
Okay. Sorry. Well, definitely the German associations have had success in their approaches with the regulator. I think they have very frequent contact even, and are on good speaking terms with the regulator.
Okay, that's good. Because sometimes these things they're antagonistic and you know, which is no good for anybody at all, ever.
I mean, it always depends on which interests they are actually representing and which of those interests of their members are dominating. But from what I can tell, obviously me being advising a lot of these online operators that are solely operating on the online sphere. Obviously, there are a few that have a huge market share on the land-based market. Mm-hmm. Still, I think that all interests are being represented by these associations.
Okay, I just want to make sure everybody's looked after. I do want to come back around full circle to the slightly shocking story of last week and the week before about the it was Merkur, wasn't it? Merkur Online. And the hacker exposing the frailties in their setup. And it's, I mean, I was really shocked when I first read it. I genuinely was really, really shocked because the scale of insecurity that the hacker found was really, I think, fairly extraordinary. And it's a slightly mind-blowing story, but has there been any has there been any response from the regulator? And like, when something this grand happens,
Mhm.
does that have any real world impact on the industry and the regulator and the relationship? Does anything change as a result of things like this? Are things possibly going to change as a result of this?
It is too early to say whether this data leak of a certain number of operators will have an impact on the relationship between customers and operators as a whole, and between operators and the regulator. But I think from what I've understood, it was also the regulator, that was affected by this hack or attack. I don't know. So we shall see how the regulator positions themselves. I myself know that the regulator has been sending out letters again to a number of operators and suppliers, inquiring on how the status of the data security is, and asking them to re-pseudonymize. It's like anonymizing personal data of consumers. So this is something that has been ongoing since this data leak from 2.5 weeks ago now. Then obviously the regulator had listed a few operators on their public warnings list. I just checked it again. They are still listed there. So the issue does not seem to have been resolved to a sufficient scope from the viewpoint of the regulator yet.
That's interesting. Because I would have thought from an operator's point of view and a supplier's point of view, it would be a really good idea to just jump right on that. But yeah, what do I know?
Jump right onto it in what sense?
Fix
make
things
use
that
of
went
the
wrong.
data. I'm pretty sure that they are doing that day and night now. But as you've established with your guest in your most recent episode, that especially if there are a lot of stakeholders involved in the supply chain, it becomes more and more intransparent and difficult to actually enforce regulation, not only between regulator and the industry, but also amongst the industry and those parties that are involved in providing certain services. And one of the problems, again, established in your last episode, which I found very enlightening, was that I would assume a lot of operators don't know, or people involved in these supply chains don't really understand the scope of IT or cybersecurity needed to actually secure the personal data, because, well, the hacker only needs one loophole, and the platform provider, operator, whoever, they need to ensure that everything is tightly fixed and secured, right?
Yeah, I mean that's a point that the guest you mentioned, Chris Blake, made really well. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's like you've only got to miss one thing, and the hacker's only got to find that one thing.
And from what I've understood, this hacker, she really was proactively trying to find these loopholes or these failures, to highlight that there are failures in a grand scheme. And to me, it just seems that these few operators that were then so heavily discussed in the media became unlucky, in the sense that they were pulled into the limelight here in the in a negative sense.
Has there been much coverage of this in the consumer press in Germany?
It has been picked up, but not as much as you would have thought, or as I know of. Obviously, I receive a few newsletters and stuff, but those are catered towards gambling regulation, or people that follow that kind of industry. So yeah, in that sense, yes, it has been heavily discussed and been the top of the agenda ever since.
Do you receive the Gaming Boardroom newsletter?
I think I do, yes.
Excellent. Just checking.
It's an excellent newsletter. I love it. And I look forward to it. And then obviously I always see the highlights of the week at the end of the week on your LinkedIn.
Yeah, good times. Good times. It's like verbal diarrhea out of my fingers, basically.
No, I like that it's sarcastic, but it's not too like mean. most of the times.
I'm sure there are times when it is. Okay, so it's kind of this is something we'd like to, I think, get you back on about this at a future date when the sort of the fallout can be analyzed a little more, I think, because I do think this is potentially really interesting. I mean, be fascinating to see how it shakes out and what it means for the regulator and for the industry. But the channelization thing is like, I mean, that's the gift that keeps on giving. That's just hilarious.
Yeah.
I know that sounds like I'm being really negative. I promise I'm not. No, I probably am a bit, actually. It is really funny though.
I mean, the frustrating part about it is that there are a lot of means to actually combat the black market. But somehow, from our viewpoint, it is all being done either inefficiently or just not at all. You can't have a too unattractive product on the whitelisted or white labeled market and in parallel not efficiently or effectively work against the black market if you're a regulator. It's just, it does not go hand in hand, or, if you will, makes a perfect solution to provide a flourishing market base for the black market or offshore operators.
Yeah, it's finding that balance, isn't it? But I think if you start off too heavy-handed, it's even harder to find that balance because you're miles away from it and your starting point. And I know everybody talks about Ontario, but actually, they got so much right. They got so much right. But unfortunately, instead of Ontario, people are looking at Sweden and places like that as their examples, which is bonkers. But I think the UK is making some interesting moves as well. So I mean, there are some good examples out there. So all is not completely lost.
That's a positive note.
Yes, it is, and I'm very rarely positive. Michelle Hembury, thank you very much for joining us. Your company has been greatly, and your expertise has been greatly appreciated. And we will, if you want to, we'll have you back at a later date, and maybe Fintan will be here. Maybe he'll be having a less important day that day.
Well, I'd love to be back.
Thank you. If you've enjoyed this episode of the Gambling Files podcast, please find us on LinkedIn. Give us a big, juicy, succulent like. That nearly went wrong. You can find us under the name The Gambling Files Podcast. You can find us on Twitter under The Gambling Files. I think the handle is just @GamblingFiles. You can connect to myself, Jon Bruford, or Fintan Costello, also on LinkedIn. We're also both on Twitter. And you can find all of our previous episodes at www.thegamblingfiles.com. If you enjoyed it, please share. Tell your friends, tell your family, tell your colleagues, and we'll see you next time.